Thank you, Kenneth. Only God is real. I love that song. And that's really the core of what we're going to be talking about today, because wouldn't it be great, wouldn't life be wonderful if we could remember all the time that only God is real? Life would be so much easier, so much nicer, because everything that we see, everything that we experience, it's all just God. But we forget. We forget all the time. And when we see or experience something that our minds tell us is bad or is negative, it's because we've forgotten that only God is real. Everything else is made up in our heads. And we've become attached to our perception of things and not the truth with a capital T of things. And it's when we forget that we need to go into our spiritual toolbox and find something that we can use to correct our perception. And one of those tools is denials and affirmations. And these are a necessary factor, I believe, in everybody's spiritual growth. Because every thought that you have is either affirming or denying something. And through our humanness, we have fallen into the habit of denying the truth of God, the truth of oneness, the truth of love. And we've started to affirm error. Because our minds are, by nature, we're very logical beings, so we look for reason. We want things to make sense to us. But God doesn't always make sense. When you see others suffering or when you are suffering, it's hard to remember that God is still there, within and around everything and everyone, regardless of the outward appearance of the situation. So to live a life in faith, Ernest Holmes stated that our mind must be steady in its conviction that our life is some part of God and that the Spirit is incarnated in us. Steady in conviction. We have to keep remembering. That's where the steadiness comes in. To always go back to remembering. He says, affirmations and denials are for the purpose of vitalizing your faith, for the purpose of converting for the purpose of converting thought to a belief in things spiritual. Because again, because of our humanness, most of our thoughts aren't spiritual. I know most of mine aren't, especially when I'm driving. So we have to retrain our brains. And the process of denials and affirmation is vital in this training. So I wanted to start first by sharing the spiritual definitions of denials and affirmations. And I got these from Reverend Jennifer Sachs. She's the senior minister at Unity in Atlanta. And she defines denials as denials clear by erasing and or dissolving the power that we have given something or someone over us. They are statements of release which help us eliminate and renounce old ideas and beliefs so that we can make way for new divine ideas to flow. When we deny something, we do not deny facts, feelings, or emotions. We deny that those facts, feelings, and emotions have power over us. Neither are we in denial that challenging events occur, because of course they do. But rather, we use denial statements to remind us that no matter what is happening around us or to us, we are always free to choose our response to that experience. H. Emily Cady, who's an early New Thought writer, she taught that denial is the first practical step towards wiping out of our minds the mistaken beliefs of a lifetime. Because beliefs, they do take a lifetime to create and form. Those beliefs that have made such sad havoc in our lives. By denial, we mean declaring not to be true a thing that seems to be true. We seem to think that life is just hard sometimes, but that doesn't have to be a truth. So Reverend Sachs defined affirmations as well. She says, affirmations are statements of absolute, universal truth which help us establish new thoughts, ideas, and beliefs in our mind. They describe us and our abilities. and we can feel them at the depth of our being because they are the truth which cannot be swayed by outer circumstances. And again, Emily Cady stated that to affirm anything is to assert positively that it is so, even in the face of all contrary evidence. We have to believe beyond belief. Now, affirmations, they do not manipulate God or others, and they will not force something to happen, like trying to make someone fall in love with you. That's not how they work. Rather, affirmations help us develop a optimal thoughts and behaviors and better understand our feelings, desires, and choices so that we can live on purpose. A life on purpose. I just love that last line that Reverend Sachs wrote. To live on purpose. To me, that's just a life of meaning, of love, of happiness, of joy, of direction, of all the good that is already ours and already right in front of us. We just have to see it and claim it and accept it. But sometimes we forget to see. We forget to look for all that good. There's an old saying, "You're a thorn in my side." I didn't mean to look at you when I said that, Nancy. Okay. You're not a thorn in my side. You're the rose. But think of negative thoughts as a thorn in your side. And they dig in and they create like that persistent annoyance. Even when you're not actively thinking about it, there's still that underlying just irritation that's there. Well, denials, in a spiritual sense, they tear those thorns out of your skin, those old negative thoughts. And affirmations are like the balm that you put on the wound to soothe and to heal it. And when it comes to life's thorns, Holmes' advice was to never look at that which you do not wish to experience. No matter what the false condition may be, it must be refuted. So never look at that which you do not wish to experience. This does not mean that you walk around experiencing life with your eyes closed. It means if you see something that feels bad to you, that feels outside of God to you, that feels outside of good to you, you just remind yourself that, no, this is God as well. We don't know the whole story. This is God as well. He goes on to say that the proper kind of denial is based upon the recognition that in reality there is no limitation, for God can just as easily make a planet as they can an acorn. The infinite knows no difference between $1 million and a penny. It only knows that it is. I like to use the metaphor of ants. If you look at a bunch of ants, Tim just blew out our patio the other day and angered a bunch of them, so we had like a swarm of them. And from an ant's perspective, we must seem like gods to them, right? Like we're just these giant things that can control and destroy their world at any given moment. But do you think the ants are asking us for a drop of sugar or for a whole jar of honey? Like we don't know the difference. We don't even think about that. And we have to remember that is the same with God to us. He doesn't care what we ask for. It doesn't care. I still say he. See, those are those old thoughts that are still persistent. So, let's break that down a little bit more. When you ask for something, when you pray, don't limit yourself. That's what he's saying. Don't set limits upon the good in your life, because there is more good for you out there than you can ever imagine. So in religious science, we have this type of affirmative prayer. It's very similar to Unity's 5-step prayer process with just a few changes, but we call ours spiritual mind treatment, which is just treating the mind spiritually instead of logically. But really, it's all just affirmative prayer. And the mental attitude of the person praying should be one of denial towards every false condition that opposes the principle of life as one of absolute perfection. That's the purpose of affirmative prayer. God's world is perfect, and we get to manifest that in our life. And prayer is one of the tools that we get to do that, and denials and affirmations are part of that prayer. So Holmes goes on to say, do not be afraid of this approach. He actually calls this a form of argumentative prayer, which I love. I love a good argument with myself, because you're not arguing with anybody else. You're arguing with yourself to prove something, to prove to yourself. That's why it's called science, religious science. Science meant something different 120 years ago when all of this started. We probably wouldn't call it that today, but it's called religious science because the goal was to prove to yourself the truth of God, the truth of the universe, the truth of spiritual laws. So he says, do not be afraid of this approach. Do not be afraid to set down on one side all of the negative appearances that you have in your life and admitting that they are only conditions. So he actually encourages to write a list of all the things that you think are bad in your life. And then on the other side of the paper, one at a time, you offset all of those conditions with the truth, with the spiritual truth. So for example, you may feel like you're going through a period where you're just broke. You have no money. You're destitute. But the truth is, when you look at your life, you probably have abundance in multiple forms. If you have a home, you're abundant compared to the person that doesn't. So it's about being able to recognize the good that we already have, because that helps us manifest even more good into our life. And this is what we call realization. The argumentative method of treatment is a series of affirmations and denials for the purpose of building up in the mind of the prayer, the person praying, a state of realization and acceptance of God's love, of all of God's good that is available to us. We just have to accept it. The power is in the realization, but there's also power in the argument, because we're retraining our brain. We're switching those wires around to think spiritually instead of logically. So I'm going to go through the steps in a typical spiritual mind treatment. And again, it's just another form of prayer. Step 1, recognition. We recognize the infinite spirit of God. God is in and works through all things. In this step, we create a feeling of God's presence, and we start to intellectually list all the qualities of God. Because when we engage the intellect with spiritual thoughts, we start to bridge that gap between the logic and the spirit. Step 2 is unification. It's when we unify ourselves with the presence of God. So we've just listed all the good that God is, and now it's time to remember that all that good is within you as well. Because your real self, your spiritual self, is perfect in every way, even when we require change, which we all do at times, because that's a part of life. But for all of the things that God is, so are you. Step 3, realization. This is where the magic happens. This is my favorite part. Imagine how you feel when you receive whatever it is that you want. How wonderful does it feel when you've realized your dreams? We feel the experiences as though they are happening to us right now, and we build mental pictures in our mind and intensify that thrill and that confidence of knowing that you have mastery over all of your problems. The goal of this step is to build the strongest possible feeling of already having what you want. The stronger the feeling, the stronger the treatment. And we create that feeling through the use of denials and affirmations. Because before we can heal any condition, whether that's poverty, health, sadness, whatever condition that you may be experiencing, we have to separate ourselves from the thought itself. Many failed prayers are because the seeker never lets go of the idea that the condition belongs to him in some way. Words matter. We've talked about that a lot. Words really matter. You may be experiencing sickness, you may be experiencing poverty, you may be experiencing sadness, but you are not sick, you are not poor, and you are not sad, because you are so much more than a single word. You are so much more than a string of words. You are a walking, talking spark of divine creation, experiencing life. And sometimes we experience those things that we don't want to. So in those moments when we, again, forget the truth, that is the moment in prayer that we convince ourselves that all the good that we want is already ours to have. This is when we start with the affirmations, because you're stating what you want as if you already have it. You're convincing yourself of the truth that all is God, and God is health, God is abundance, God is joy, fulfillment, God is love. All the good that you want, God is. And you may have thoughts of lack creeping in while doing this, and that's when you deny those erroneous thoughts and reaffirms God's perfection in its place. Holmes wrote, God is not sick, God is not poor, God is not unhappy, God is never afraid, God is never confused, God is never out of place. The premise upon which all spiritual work is based on the knowledge that there is perfect God, perfect man, and perfect being. And he also tells us not to get bogged down in the facts of life in this process, because facts are relative. They really are. Every person in this room is experiencing this moment right now differently. Every one of us has a different set of facts in our head about what's happening right now in this moment. And any denial that we make in prayer is simply to get us to that greater place of affirmation. So again, we're not denying that things happen. We are denying the power that it has over us. We're denying that we're going to hold a negative story in our bodies and in our minds over something that happened. Because anytime a negative thought comes through, we must stop and declare that all the images of limitations, whether person, place, or thing, that they have no power, no personality, and no presence over us. We are free from their influence forever. That really made me think of The Labyrinth. I'm going to state my age here. You guys see the movie with The Labyrinth? With David Bowie? There has to be some 80s kids in here. Okay. I see a few hands. At the very end, there's this woman, she's stuck in a labyrinth trying to rescue her baby brother, and the Goblin King is holding the brother hostage. He's David Bowie, and he looks really good in that movie. And at the very end, she comes face to face with this Goblin King, and like the clock is ticking down and everything's going to get destroyed, and she suddenly realizes and says, "You have no power over me." And the entire world that she's in literally shatters and crumbles. And that's what I envisioned when I read that. You have no power over me. So we begin to fill our thoughts with the idea of faith and the expectancy of good and the realization of plenty. We put our whole trust in the law of good, and it becomes very real to us. And we continue to deny anything and everything that contradicts this realization of truth. Now, I will say that Holmes actually admitted once that he didn't think that denials were the easiest or the best way to pray. But he recognized the need for it because we all forget. And sometimes we can't find an affirmation without finding what we have to deny first. One of my favorite stories that Holmes shared, and I can't remember if it was in one of his lectures or one of the books, but he was talking about this process of denial and affirmation, and a lifelong friend of his was in the hospital dying, and he went to go sit with him, and he couldn't not be mad. He was so upset because his friend was dying. So he decided then and there that he was going to start a spiritual mind treatment for himself. He put one chair on one side of the bed, and he went out into the hallway, and he grabbed another stool from the nurse's station, and he put it on the other side of his friend's bed. And on this chair, he was Reverend Ernest Holmes. And on this chair, he was just Ernie, with his friend dying. And what he did is he would sit as Ernie. I call him Ernie. I don't know what he called himself. I call him Ernie. My grandpa was an Ernest, and we always called him Ernie, so. So Ernie, the man, the human, was sitting here, but my friend's dying. Look at him. He's probably not even going to survive the night. The doctors are saying this. The nurses are saying that. He'd get up and he'd be. But the spiritual principle is that there's only God. and that Bill is one with God. And God is pure health. God is pure love. So Bill is health and love. But he's dying. But he's God. But he's clearly not going to live. But he's God. And he did this for about 40 minutes, he said. He finally got to the point in his mind that he accepted that, yes, Bill was one with God. And he looked over and his friend was dead. And that doesn't mean that he failed. In fact, it gave him great peace because more than ever, he really was one with God. That's spiritual mind treatment. What that allowed for him was he was able to then leave without that hate, without that anger, without that confusion and upset. He was able to leave that room loving his friend, loving everyone who attended him, and knowing beyond a doubt that he was with God. I always loved that story. And the fact that he literally argued with himself for 40 minutes. Okay, that was all the third step. The fourth step of prayer, Thanksgiving. An attitude of gratitude is always the answer to many of your problems. This step is the acknowledgement that God, that the divine, has already created everything that you just treated for. Everything that you prayed for, it's already there. So we say thanks with happiness, with gratitude, and with excitement because we know that God has our back. The fifth step in spiritual mind treatment is release. We let it go. Here's the thing about releasing a prayer, and whether this is a formal prayer or it's an affirmation, a desire, a wish, whatever it is. If you don't release it, you are telling the universe that you don't actually believe it's going to happen. Because holding on to a prayer is a sure sign that you need to keep praying about it. It means that you don't believe your own words yet. On the other hand, when you can confidently say a prayer and let it go, that's when you truly believe that it's actually going to happen. There's no doubt left in your mind that God's got you. And that is how we manifest our desires. That is how shift happens in our spiritual life. If you find yourself continuing to pray for the same thing over and over and over again, ask yourself why you have to keep doing that. Because it's not because it hasn't been presented to you. The answer is right there. You're just not accepting it. Okay, so I know that was a lot. So I'm going to give you a cheat sheet for spiritual mind treatment. God is, I am, I know, I'm grateful, I let go. Those are the 5 steps. And if you noticed, the meditation we did today, that was a spiritual mind treatment. I took you through all of those steps with the added silent meditation part, which is not part of the religious science prayer process, but it is part of Unity's prayer process, which I loved so much when I took Teresa's class that I kind of incorporated. I'm mixing the two. And I have one more cheat for you as well, because this is a lot of information. This is actually from Heptia Hasbrook. Did I say her name right? Hypatia. I knew I was saying it really wrong. Hypatia Hasbrook, she wrote the Handbook of Positive Prayer, and she offers what she calls an all-purpose denial. And it goes like this. This is powerless to take or keep good from me. This is powerless to take or keep my good from me. And you can substitute the word this for anything that you want. Anything that you're struggling with. This is powerless to take or keep my good from me. And with that, Kenneth has a very fun song about affirmations for us. So thank you so much. And so it is.